The galaxy had seen many races rise and fall, each with its own unique traits and histories. Some were born to conquer, others to explore, and still, others to be tools for greater powers. Humanity, however, did not fit neatly into any of these categories. When the first human ships were seen by the Galactic Council, there were snickers and smirks. The human race, they concluded, was too young, too primitive, too divided to ever pose a real threat. They had no ancient lineage of warriors, no culture steeped in the art of combat. Earth had known only a few short wars between its own people before they had reached the stars. The people of the galaxy, in their centuries of galactic diplomacy, had seen it all. And none of them had seen a species like humans. The first humans who entered the Galactic Council were ambassadors, scientists, diplomats, and traders. Earth's place among the stars was supposed to be one of cooperation and peaceful coexistence. The humans, with their fragile physiology, short lifespans, and penchant for self-destructive tendencies, were seen as a curiosity rather than a power. But there was something else, something deep inside humanity, that the other species failed to see. It wasn't their technology or their ambitions that made them different. It was their ability to adapt. Humanity had a natural drive to survive. It was ingrained in them, so deeply that they did not even realize how different it made them from every other species they encountered. Where other species had spent millennia perfecting their genetic makeup for a singular purpose, whether that be war, intellect, or endurance, humans were not born with a single function. They were a species defined by their diversity. Humans could excel at anything because they were willing to learn, to change, to try, fail, and try again. It was this adaptability that would prove to be their most deadly weapon. And the galaxy had no idea what was coming. At first, humans were just another voice in the council chambers, their representatives sitting silently as the elder species debated trade routes, peace accords, and the ever-present threat of pirate raids. But it was during a routine conflict, over a mining dispute on the fringe world of Arteris, that the first true test came. The Arteris miners, a group of hardy but volatile humanoids, had clashed with the Zorn, a species known for their massive size and brute strength. The Zorn had demanded an absurdly high price for their protection services, a cost that the miners could not afford. A fight broke out, and before long, the entire system was on the verge of collapse. The Galactic Council, in their usual fashion, took their time deliberating. Meanwhile, the bloodshed continued. It was then that the humans intervened. Not with grand armies or devastating weapons, but with something far more insidious, tactical thinking. One human captain, Captain Arya Steele, who had only been stationed on the diplomatic fleet for a year, had studied the situation in depth. Instead of rushing in with brute force, she used her keen understanding of human psychology and tactics to exploit the weaknesses of both sides. Her crew, an eclectic mix of soldiers, engineers, diplomats, and thinkers, had no experience fighting in a war, but they knew how to solve problems. Captain Steele brokered a ceasefire, not by offering concessions, but by pointing out the inherent flaws in both faction strategies. The Zorn, overconfident in their size, had underestimated the resourcefulness of the miners. The miners, desperate and unwilling to lose their livelihood, had been too entrenched in their own stubbornness to see reason. Through simple negotiation, using knowledge of the terrain, the opposing factions' behaviors, and the understanding that humans had no inherent loyalties to either side, Steele offered a solution. Instead of a bloody conflict, both sides could profit from a mutual trade agreement, under the oversight of a neutral party, humans. It wasn't just the peace that she brokered, it was the way humanity had found a way to navigate the complexities of war, even when they were not the natural warriors. The Zorn were impressed, as were the miners. But the real shock came when Steele's forces remained in the system, not to oversee the peace, but to train both factions in better ways to secure their own futures without resorting to violence. The galaxy had never seen anything like it before. Humans didn't just end a war, they taught others how to avoid it. This was only the beginning. As humanity's presence in the galaxy grew, so did their reputation. They had no ancient combat techniques, no invincible warriors bred for battle, but they had something far more dangerous, a mind that could bend to any challenge and a will to endure. Other species would soon learn that humanity's true strength was not in their ability to fight, but in their capacity to outthink, outlast, and adapt to any situation. The most unlikely species in the galaxy had just become the deadliest. And their story was only beginning. As the humans continued to establish their presence in the galaxy, they quickly earned the respect of many species. Captain Arya Steele's actions on Arteris had become a legend, an example of how a species not bred for war could not only survive but thrive in a galaxy filled with powerful and aggressive beings. Still, there were those who underestimated the humans, dismissing them as lucky. But that luck, it seemed, was no accident. For every peaceful resolution, every diplomatic triumph, humanity showed the galaxy another side of itself. But what no one could see coming was how humanity would rise when pushed into a corner. The turning point came on the planet Devrian, a world known for its high-value resources and mercenary contractors. Devrian had always been a hotspot for conflict, with rival factions and corporations battling for control of its mines and factories. The planet's population had grown tired of the constant warfare, and despite their warlike reputation, they had reached out to the Galactic Council for a peaceful resolution. It was a simple request, nothing more than a plea for peace. The Council had sent diplomats, peacekeepers, and negotiators. Yet, no matter what methods were used, the fighting never stopped. The planetary warlords were too entrenched in their thirst for power. And it was here that humanity's presence would take a drastic turn. The United Human Confederation had not been involved in the Devrian conflict up until this point. It was seen as a simple matter of galactic diplomacy. But humanity, with its sharp strategic minds, recognized something no one else did. The warlords on Devrian weren't just fighting for power, they were fighting for survival. The constant wars had created a cycle of violence that no one had the will to break. Humanity saw that the only way to end the fighting was not with peace treaties or military intervention, but by offering an entirely new perspective. This was the first time humanity had been pushed to take a direct, active role in a war. Humanity's military was small but quickly growing. The United Human Confederation had developed tactics and technologies adapted from their early exploratory ventures, innovations born from necessity rather than sheer military might. And it was these adaptations that would soon put them on a collision course with the established powers of the galaxy. At the forefront of the conflict on Devrian was General Nadia Hawkins, a former peacekeeper who had been trained in the art of conflict resolution. Her story mirrored that of Captain Steele's. She wasn't bred for war, but she had found a way to make her people formidable. Under her leadership, the human forces began to push back the warlords' armies, but not in the way any of the other species expected. Rather than overwhelming force, Hawkins applied a strategy of precision and psychological warfare. The human forces didn't rush in to crush the enemy. Instead, they infiltrated key areas with small, agile squads. They disrupted supply lines, sowed disinformation, and used the warlords' own distrust against them. Hawkins understood that the Devrian conflict wasn't about who had the biggest army, it was about who controlled the flow of information, resources, and loyalty. And humanity knew how to manipulate all of these. The warlords, who had been so used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer brutality, were unprepared for a fight that targeted their egos, their ambitions, and their sense of control. What they didn't realize was that humans, without the weight of an ancient warlike culture, were willing to break every rule of traditional combat to achieve their goal. The humans' impact on Devrian was immediate. Within months, the balance of power had shifted. The warlords who once controlled vast armies found themselves isolated, their own forces turning against them. The very thing they relied on, brute strength, was now their greatest liability. They couldn't adapt as quickly as the humans. They couldn't think outside the box the way humans could. On the battlefield, the human forces looked unassuming, lightly armored, smaller in number than the Zorn or the Kalon, but they moved with precision, like a well-oiled machine. General Hawkins led from the front, coordinating strikes that appeared disjointed to their enemies but were, in fact, meticulously planned. The warlords, confused and outmatched, began to crumble. But the true shock came when the humans didn't just fight the warlords, they offered them a choice. After the last major battle, when the warlords were on the brink of defeat, General Hawkins met with the leaders of the factions not as a conqueror, but as a negotiator. She proposed a new system, one in which the warlords could retain control over their territories, but only if they agreed to a new economic and political structure, one that would end the bloodshed and provide a long-term solution. It was unheard of. Other galactic powers would have crushed the warlords and seized the planet's resources for themselves. But humanity didn't just seek conquest, they saw an opportunity to reshape the galaxy, to break the cycle of violence. Devrion's warlords, though initially hostile to the idea, began to see the wisdom in Hawkins' offer. They were tired of fighting. They were tired of endless cycles of war. They saw in humanity something they had not seen before, a species that was not only willing to fight but was capable of remaking an entire galaxy with its ideas, strategies, and vision. The moment the last warlord signed the agreement, the galaxy took notice. Humanity had not only fought a war, they had changed the entire course of it, and in doing so, had proven that their greatest strength wasn't in their weapons, but in their ability to think, adapt, and survive. But this was only the beginning. The warlords may have been defeated, but there were others who were watching, waiting for the chance to challenge humanity's rising dominance. And as the United Human Confederation began to expand their influence, the galaxy's old powers would soon discover just how deadly a species could be when it was no longer fighting to survive, but fighting to change everything. As the dust settled on Devrion and the warlord's signatures were etched into history, the United Human Confederation saw a rapid expansion across the galaxy. What began as a diplomatic mission, a peaceful approach to galactic cooperation, was now morphing into something far more influential. Humans had shown themselves not only as capable peacemakers but as masters of subtle power. But with power came opposition. Humanity's influence did not go unnoticed. The older, more established galactic species, the ones who had dominated the galaxy for centuries, watched with growing unease. The Zorn, a race of hulking warriors known for their military prowess and territorial dominance, began to take issue with humanity's growing presence. They were used to being the strongest force in the galaxy, their massive ships and brutal tactics the envy of other species. The Kaelon, a cold, calculating race of cybernetically enhanced intellects, also felt the rise of humanity's influence was a direct threat to their control over the galactic economy. Even the peaceful Dren, who prided themselves on harmony and balance, grew worried about the human thirst for progress. What set humanity apart, however, was not just the way they adapted, it was the speed at which they evolved. While the Zorn and Kaelon had spent millennia perfecting their own ways of life, humanity had managed to leapfrog entire eons of development in a matter of centuries. And they had one thing that the others didn't, a collective drive to push beyond their limits, to break barriers that no one thought could be broken. This caused a rift within the Galactic Council. At first, the humans were allowed to sit at the table as equals, but as their influence spread, many of the older races grew resentful. They began to question whether humanity's methods were sustainable, whether they had the true capacity to wield the kind of power they had been amassing. Some began to whisper that humanity's success wasn't just about diplomacy, but about a deeper, more dangerous ambition. The spark that ignited the conflict came when a human explorer stumbled upon a relic of an ancient and powerful civilization on the edge of the galaxy, one that had been wiped out by a long-forgotten cataclysm. The relic, however, held knowledge, technology, a long-forgotten energy source, something that had the potential to change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Humanity, eager to understand and harness this power, began to reverse-engineer the ancient technology. But the discovery did not sit well with the galactic powers who had kept such knowledge buried, locked away in fear of what it could mean. The Zorn, seeing humanity's potential to weaponize this power, called for the human explorers to be expelled from the Council. The Kaelon demanded that the relic be turned over to their scientists, warning of the catastrophic consequences if it were mishandled by a species so young and unrefined. This was the point at which humanity's methods would be truly tested. Rather than cowering to the demands of the galactic powers, the United Human Confederation doubled down. Their scientists, engineers, and military strategists worked feverishly to understand the technology. With their drive for innovation, humanity made a breakthrough. They did not just understand the relic, they integrated it. The power it held became part of their ships, their weapons, and their defense systems. Humans had harnessed it not with brute force or ancient rituals, but through their relentless determination to understand, adapt, and evolve. And when the Zorn and Kaelon threatened to attack the human colonies if they did not relinquish the technology, humanity responded not with threats, but with action. The first demonstration came when a Zorn dreadnought, the most powerful warship in their fleet, approached the human colony on Zephyrus, its weapons primed and ready to obliterate. The human forces, knowing the odds were against them, activated their new technology. In a brilliant display of ingenuity, humanity's ships didn't engage in a direct confrontation with the Zorn, they used the relic's power to generate a massive energy shield, one that absorbed and redirected the Zorn's fire back onto their own ships. The result was devastating. The Zorn, who had thought their weapons were invincible, were caught off guard by humanity's ability to not only defend against their onslaught but to turn their own fire back on them. The Zorn fleet was decimated in mere minutes, a humbling defeat for a species that had never been challenged in such a way. The Kaelon, watching from the sidelines, knew that they were next. Humanity's success in defeating the Zorn was not just a military triumph, it was a statement. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, and humanity was no longer just a curiosity. They were now a force to be reckoned with. But the Kaelon were calculating. They had never been quick to act without careful planning. Instead of rushing into battle, they turned to diplomacy. They invited humanity to the negotiating table, offering a deal. The technology humanity had uncovered would remain in the hands of the Galactic Council, and in exchange, the Kaelon would provide humanity with unparalleled access to their intellectual resources. Humanity, however, saw the deal for what it was, an attempt to control them, to limit their potential. They did not need the Kaelon to hold their hand. They had already proven that they were capable of more. And in this moment, the leaders of the United Human Confederation made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. Rather than accept the Kaelon's offer, humanity chose independence. They would continue to refine their new technology, expand their influence, and grow their military power, not as a part of the Galactic Council, but as a separate force, untethered by old alliances and old systems. They had proven that they were more than capable of standing alone. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and now it would have to reckon with the consequences. Humanity's decision to strike out on its own sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The United Human Confederation, once a humble member of the Galactic Council, had now become a power unto itself. While some species were furious, others began to view humanity as a potential ally, or threat, depending on their own interests. The galaxy had always been divided into factions, alliances formed through necessity and the delicate balance of power. Humanity had upset that balance. The Zorn, humiliated by their loss to humanity, sought to regain their pride and dominance. They began rebuilding their military forces, rallying other warlike species in an effort to unite against what they now saw as a growing menace. Their once proud reputation had been shattered, and their leaders were desperate to restore their position at the top of the galactic hierarchy. The Kaelon, ever the strategists, remained calm. They understood that humanity was unpredictable, but they also recognized the potential in human innovation. The Kaelon did not want to destroy humanity, they wanted to control it. They began to infiltrate human systems, sending covert operatives and intelligence agents to monitor human developments. If humanity were to become a threat, the Kaelon wanted to be the first to know, and the first to act. But humanity was more than aware of the looming threats. General Nadia Hawkins, now a key figure in the Confederation, led the charge to fortify human defenses. With the relic's power integrated into their fleet and weapons, the human forces became a formidable presence. Humanity didn't need to match the sheer size of the Zorn or the intelligence of the Kaelon, they just needed to be smarter, faster, and more unpredictable. The first test came sooner than expected. The Zorn, having rebuilt their fleet, launched an assault on one of the outer human colonies, an unremarkable world called Syrinx, known for its resource-rich mines. The humans had little to lose in terms of strategic value, but they had already made their presence known. The Zorn viewed it as an opportunity to send a message: humanity could be defeated, humiliated, and made to bow to the old powers. As the Zorn fleet descended upon Syrinx, humanity did not panic. They had learned the lessons of Devrian and understood that their strength was in their adaptability. General Hawkins, now recognized as a master strategist, gathered her commanders and began to implement a daring plan. She knew the Zorn would expect a conventional defense, and they would strike hard and fast, looking to crush the colony with brute force. But humanity had other ideas. Hawkins didn't just fortify the colony's defenses. She turned the entire planet into a trap. Using the relic's power, the humans had designed a new form of warfare, an energy pulse weapon that could disrupt large-scale ships and render them vulnerable. But the key was not just in its destructive power, it was in the way it could manipulate the battlefield. Hawkins had been working on a system that would allow the humans to create false signals, misdirecting enemy ships into predetermined zones. When the Zorn fleet arrived, they were met with an illusion: dozens of human ships that were nothing more than decoys, emitting false readings. The Zorn's massive ships, expecting easy prey, descended on the apparent human fleet. It was only when they were in range that the trap was sprung. The energy pulse weapons activated, disabling the lead Zorn ship's shields and rendering it completely vulnerable. The humans didn't hesitate. Using their superior speed and maneuverability, they tore through the Zorn forces, destroying key ships and scattering the rest. The Zorn were forced to retreat, their morale shattered. The humans had once again outsmarted them, this time on a scale they hadn't imagined possible. The Zorn had the numbers, the strength, and the experience, but humanity had one thing they didn't: the ability to think several steps ahead, to act in ways that were completely unpredictable. But it wasn't just the Zorn who were watching. The Kaelon, who had been observing the events from a distance, saw humanity's growing power as both a threat and an opportunity. They could no longer afford to sit idly by while humanity carved out its own future. Their agents began to move faster, infiltrating human networks, seeking any weakness they could exploit. The Kaelon had long since perfected the art of subterfuge, and they were about to test whether humanity's technological prowess could truly withstand their influence. But humanity, despite its newfound strength, was not invulnerable. There were still cracks in the foundation, dissent among some factions, distrust among leaders, and the ever-present question of whether they could maintain their independence in the face of overwhelming pressure from the galaxy's old powers. At a high-level summit in the capital of the Confederation, a debate raged among the leaders of humanity. Some advocated for a more peaceful approach, a return to diplomacy and cooperation with the Galactic Council. They argued that humanity's strength lay in its ability to unite and collaborate, that war should not be the path they chose. Others, led by General Hawkins, argued that humanity's true power came from their ability to stand alone, to create their own destiny without being shackled by the old ways of thinking. Hawkins believed that the galaxy had already seen what humanity was capable of, and now was the time to forge their own path, not as pawns in a larger game, but as players in their own right. The decision was made: humanity would not return to the old system. They would fight to protect their independence, to ensure that no one would dictate their future. They would not bow to the Kaelon, nor would they surrender to the Zorn. Humanity's path was clear: no longer just a species of survivors, they were now a force of change. And in a galaxy full of ancient powers, humanity's rise would not just be a matter of survival. It would be a revolution. The galaxy was no longer just a battleground for control over resources and territory. It had become a war of ideas, a struggle for dominance over the future itself. As humanity made its declaration of independence, the galaxy's most powerful factions began to prepare for what seemed inevitable: a confrontation. But this time, it wasn't going to be a war fought with conventional armies alone. It would be a war fought in the shadows, a battle of espionage, intelligence, and subtle maneuvering. The Kaelon, having lost their initial gambit to control humanity, turned to their greatest strength, the art of deception and manipulation. The Kaelon, masters of cyber warfare and subversive tactics, launched a series of covert operations aimed at destabilizing humanity from within. They infiltrated human systems, spreading disinformation, planting sleeper agents, and even sowing seeds of dissent among human leadership. Their goal wasn't to engage in open warfare, not yet, but to weaken humanity's resolve, to turn them against each other before they could even reach the battlefield. The Zorn, humiliated by their defeat at Syrinx, took a different approach. They understood that humanity's greatest strength was its unpredictability, its ability to innovate and adapt. The Zorn did not believe they could simply overpower the humans in open combat. Instead, they decided to target humanity's most vulnerable asset, its newfound independence. They began to rally old allies, mercenary groups, rebellious factions, and disgruntled colonies, and started a campaign of sabotage and rebellion on the fringes of human space. These attacks were meant to stretch humanity's resources thin, to force them into a constant state of defense. It was a tactic designed to wear down their resolve over time. In the midst of this rising conflict, General Nadia Hawkins faced her greatest challenge yet. She had led humanity through battles and negotiations, but now she was tasked with leading them through a war fought not with armies, but with subterfuge and counterintelligence. Humanity had learned quickly how to fight in the open, but now they had to learn how to fight in the shadows. The United Human Confederation established a secretive task force known as the Nightshade Initiative, a team composed of the best spies, hackers, and strategists humanity had to offer. Their mission was clear: expose and dismantle the Kaelon's covert operations, root out Zorn-backed rebel cells, and ensure that humanity's independence would not be compromised from within. The Nightshade Initiative, under the leadership of Commander Lyle Carter, set to work. Carter was a brilliant strategist with a mind suited for the complexities of espionage. He understood that the key to winning a war in the shadows wasn't just about intelligence, it was about controlling the narrative. Humanity needed to strike at the heart of their enemies' networks, discredit their claims, and destabilize their influence. The initiative worked tirelessly, infiltrating enemy comms, breaking encryption codes, and sending false intelligence back to the enemy, all while covering their tracks with a precision that no one had ever expected from a species so new to the game of galactic politics. One of the most critical moments came when a series of high-profile assassinations threatened to ignite a full-scale war between the Confederation and one of its allies, the Dren. The Dren, a peaceful and diplomatic species, were horrified when their ambassadors were killed in an attack on a neutral diplomatic station. The humans were immediately blamed, and the galaxy watched in shock as accusations were hurled at the Confederation. But Commander Carter and his team uncovered the truth: the attacks were not carried out by humans, but were orchestrated by the Kaelon in an attempt to frame them and break apart the fragile alliances humanity had forged. The Nightshade Initiative moved swiftly. They not only provided evidence that the Kaelon were behind the plot but also launched a daring mission to expose the truth during a high-profile peace summit attended by all the major galactic powers. In a stunning twist, humanity's operatives infiltrated the summit itself, hacking into the broadcast and revealing the Kaelon's manipulation to the entire galaxy. The truth was undeniable. Humanity, despite all odds, had outplayed the Kaelon at their own game. The galaxy was stunned. The Kaelon's reputation as master manipulators was shattered, and their influence began to wane. Their hold on the galactic economy, once unchallenged, began to slip as other factions started to doubt their reliability. Humanity, once seen as a naive and untested species, had proven that they could not only survive in the galaxy, they could outthink and outmaneuver the oldest and most powerful forces in the galaxy. But victory in the shadows came at a price. The Zorn, furious at humanity's continued success, escalated their attacks. They began launching open assaults on human colonies, but these were not just military strikes. They were desperate, brutal campaigns designed to send a message that humanity was not welcome in the galaxy and that they would pay the price for their defiance. In response, General Hawkins shifted the strategy. Humanity would not be dragged into a prolonged conflict with the Zorn, not yet. Instead, they would strike at the heart of Zorn power, disrupting their ability to wage war. Using the relic's power and their growing fleet, humanity launched a series of surgical strikes on key Zorn military installations, disabling their weapon systems and rendering entire fleets immobile. For the first time, the Zorn saw what it felt like to be truly vulnerable. The brutal warrior race, accustomed to overwhelming force and crushing their enemies, was left scrambling as their once-feared war machines were turned against them. Humanity was no longer just a survivor in the galaxy, they were the galaxy's new power. The Kaelon, watching from the sidelines, knew that they had underestimated humanity once more. It was no longer a matter of stopping a young species from growing. The question now was whether the galaxy could contain humanity's drive to reshape it. But as humanity stood at the precipice of this new era, they faced a greater challenge than ever before. The war in the shadows had revealed their strength, but it had also made them enemies of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. The real test had only just begun. Could humanity survive in a galaxy that now saw them not as an ally, but as a threat? With the Kaelon's covert operations unraveling and the Zorn's pride in tatters, the galaxy had entered a new and dangerous phase. Humanity's rise was no longer something to be ignored or underestimated, it had become an existential threat to the old order. And as the shadows of war stretched ever deeper into the corners of the galaxy, humanity's enemies began to take more drastic measures. The Kaelon, whose subtlety had once been their greatest asset, were now forced to rethink their strategy. Rather than operate in the shadows, they would move into the light with open declarations and diplomatic pressure. The Kaelon forged an alliance with the Dren, who, despite their pacifist nature, could no longer ignore the threat of a galaxy dominated by humanity. Together, they began a full-scale propaganda campaign against the United Human Confederation. The message was simple: humanity was a reckless, expansionist species, unwilling to abide by the rules that had kept the galaxy's peace for centuries. The Kaelon's masterful manipulation of information spread like wildfire, and soon even neutral factions began to question humanity's intentions. The once fragile alliances that humanity had worked so hard to build began to fracture. The galaxy that had once been united by the promise of cooperation now faced an age-old question: who would control the future? While the galactic powers worked their political and military machines into action, General Nadia Hawkins focused on the one thing humanity had always done best: survival. She understood that diplomacy and war could only get them so far. Humanity's true strength lay in their adaptability, their resilience. She was no longer just a general, she had become a symbol of humanity's determination. Despite the escalating tensions, Hawkins knew that humanity could not afford an open war with every faction. They had to play a more complex game, one of alliances and counter-alliances, a war where the true battlefields were economic systems, political leverage, and information warfare. And humanity's greatest weapon in this new era was the one thing no one had ever seen coming: the power of unity. The Confederation's leadership, once divided on the best course of action, rallied behind Hawkins. They launched a counteroffensive of their own, one that would not be fought in space, but in the hearts and minds of the galaxy's people. Humanity would expose the hypocrisy of their opponents, showing that the established powers had long used their influence to maintain a broken system that kept species in constant fear of war and stagnation. To this end, the Nightshade Initiative became humanity's spearhead, not just for covert operations, but for a massive media blitz that spread across every corner of the galaxy. Through hacked broadcasts, leaked documents, and intercepted communications, humanity revealed the truth of the Kaelon's manipulations, the Zorn's hidden military campaigns, and the Dren's unspoken agendas. It wasn't just about winning battles, it was about revealing the faces behind the masks of galactic power. As the campaign gained traction, the unexpected happened. A wave of dissent spread through the once unified galactic powers. Colonies that had been under the control of the Kaelon began to push back, tired of the bureaucratic control and cold, calculating rule. The Zorn, faced with mounting internal strife and economic setbacks, struggled to hold together their vast empire. Even the Dren, long a symbol of peace, began to question the alliances they had entered into. Humanity had not only revealed the truth but had done something even more remarkable: they had made the galaxy question its very foundations. The peace that had been so carefully constructed over centuries now seemed fragile, a web of lies and power plays that had stifled true progress. But the real battle was far from over. With the public turning against the old powers, the Kaelon and Zorn shifted gears. They no longer sought to manipulate humanity's image, now, they sought to end humanity's rise, once and for all. They formed an uneasy alliance, setting aside their differences to confront the growing threat of humanity. The Kaelon would use their unparalleled intellect to devise a master plan, while the Zorn would serve as the muscle, a brute force to crush humanity's growing power. The final confrontation, however, would not be on a traditional battlefield. It would come on the high-stakes stage of galactic diplomacy, where the fate of the galaxy would be decided by a series of monumental summits, negotiations, and confrontations. Humanity's strategy was simple: hold their ground, expose the corruption, and push for a new order, one where their voice could no longer be silenced. In a dramatic turn of events, the Kaelon launched a false flag operation, framing humanity for an attack on a neutral world, hoping to ignite a war that would once again put humanity on the defensive. But the plan backfired. The truth, as always, was on humanity's side. They used their technological edge to hack into the Kaelon's own data networks, revealing their machinations to the galaxy in a stunning display of transparency. Once again, humanity had outplayed its enemies, but the cost was high. The galaxy's distrust of humanity grew deeper, as old alliances began to form between the Kaelon, Zorn, and Dren. The United Human Confederation was now standing at the edge of a precipice, surrounded on all sides by enemies who had only one goal: to tear them down and restore the old order. General Hawkins knew the time for subtlety was over. The next phase of the war would not be fought in the shadows. Humanity had already proven that they could survive, and even thrive, when pressed into the darkest corners of the galaxy. Now, they had to show the galaxy that they were no longer a species that could be pushed aside. They were a species that would rise, not in the shadow of others, but as a force that could reshape the galaxy on their own terms. The galaxy stood on the brink of a new era, and the stage for the final confrontation had been set. Humanity, once the underdog in a galaxy of powerful species, had proven itself a force to be reckoned with. Now, it was time for the galaxy to see whether humanity could rise to the occasion and secure its place among the stars, or whether the old powers would crush their rebellion and restore the status quo. The United Human Confederation, led by General Nadia Hawkins, had been pushed to its limits. They had faced political sabotage, covert warfare, and open assaults from the Zorn, Kaelon, and their allies. Yet through each trial, humanity had proven itself adaptable, resourceful, and resilient. But this time, the galaxy's most powerful factions were united in their desire to end humanity's rise once and for all. The final act would not be a war of military might alone, it would be a war for the very future of the galaxy itself. The Kaelon, the intellectual titans of the galaxy, had played their hand, their manipulation of galactic politics exposed for all to see. The Zorn, the warriors who relied on brute strength, had begun to realize that overwhelming force was no longer enough to crush humanity. The Dren, once a peaceful species, had reluctantly joined the old powers in a desperate bid to stop humanity's surge. The galaxy was divided, more uncertain than ever. In a last-ditch attempt to cripple humanity's influence, the Kaelon had orchestrated an unprecedented diplomatic summit, a gathering of all the major galactic powers, with humanity as the main target. The agenda was simple: condemn humanity as a warmongering species, an out-of-control force that threatened the very fabric of galactic peace. If the summit succeeded, humanity would be isolated, its future secured in the hands of the established powers. They would have no choice but to submit, forced into the shadow of the galaxy's ruling elite. But General Hawkins had anticipated this final move. She had spent weeks preparing, gathering allies, and strategizing how to turn the tables. Humanity would not be a passive participant in their fate, they would take the fight to the heart of the galaxy's political machine. The summit was held on a massive space station, orbiting a neutral world that served as a meeting ground for the galaxy's leaders. Delegations from all factions arrived, with the Kaelon, Zorn, and Dren leading the charge to accuse humanity. As the representatives gathered in the Grand Council chamber, the tension was palpable. This was the moment where history would be made. But humanity had one final weapon: the truth. While the Kaelon and their allies had tried to frame humanity for countless crimes, General Hawkins and her team had been working behind the scenes, gathering irrefutable evidence of the old power's true intentions. They had intercepted communications, uncovered secret alliances, and exposed the lies that had been used to manipulate the galaxy's politics for centuries. When Hawkins took the stage, the room fell silent. She wasn't there to defend humanity's actions or beg for mercy, she was there to present the undeniable truth. With a single command, her team broadcasted a data dump across the entire station, revealing the Kaelon's covert operations, the Zorn's genocidal tactics, and the Dren's hidden ambitions. The data streamed in real time, as holograms of confidential documents, intercepted conversations, and testimonies from former allies filled the room. The evidence was overwhelming. The leaders of the Kaelon and Zorn watched in stunned silence as their own secrets were exposed for the galaxy to see. Humanity had done what no one had ever expected. They had turned the table, revealing the corruption, the manipulation, and the hypocrisy that had shaped the galaxy's power dynamics for millennia. The summit had been turned into a trial, and humanity was not the accused, it was the prosecutor. The fallout was immediate. The Kaelon's once unshakable influence crumbled as their manipulation was laid bare. The Zorn, once feared for their strength, were exposed as aggressors seeking to impose their will on weaker species. Even the Dren, who had entered the summit with a sense of moral superiority, were forced to reckon with the truth of their own compromises. The galaxy's perception of humanity had changed in that moment. No longer seen as a naive species, humanity was now recognized as the catalyst for change. The old powers, desperate to maintain their control, tried to rally their forces for one final push, but the galaxy's people had already begun to move. Colonies once under Kaelon or Zorn control started to declare their support for humanity's vision of a new order. Systems that had been under the thumb of old power players began to rise up, demanding autonomy and a say in their future. The balance of power had shifted. General Hawkins, standing before the gathered leaders, knew the final battle was not in the council chamber. The real battle had been fought and won in the hearts and minds of the galaxy's people. Humanity had shown them that a new way was possible, one that was built on unity, truth, and the promise of a future where no one species could dominate another. But the war was far from over. As humanity's influence spread, there would be resistance. There would be those who would fight to maintain the old ways, who would cling to their power no matter the cost. But for the first time in galactic history, humanity stood united, no longer fighting for survival, but for the future of the galaxy itself. The final reckoning had come. And in the end, the deadliest species in the galaxy, who was never born for war, but had mastered it anyway, had not just survived. They had reshaped the galaxy in their image. Humanity had won the future.